wildfire season is getting longer.
Into August into September is kind of the heat of fire season.
Smoky air chokes our summer skies.
It's coming in and it's taking over everything. It's just overwhelming.
Our Environment Northwest team examines wildfire risk in the Pacific Northwest and what it takes to recover once the flames are out. This is Living with Wildfires.
We were driving up and over the mountain pass, and then on the side of the road were two logs still smoldering, to the point that when I pulled them out into the road, they started back on fire, completely unattended. Nobody in sight, and we haven't seen anyone in a very long time. This is how wildfires start.
We're seeing more human-caused wildfires.
After 8 years in the role as Commissioner of Public Lands, Hillary Franz knows wildfire risk, and this year has it.
We are predicting significant wildfire risk for the state of Washington as we head into the 2024 season.
Coming out of our El Nino winter, things are dry. The El Nino brought warmer temperatures and less moisture to the Northwest, and forecast models indicate that trend will likely continue through most of summer. La Nina conditions are emerging, but the cool, wet pattern likely won't arrive in the Northwest until fall. Drought conditions are present in the northern Rockies, Cascades, and even the Olympic Mountains. The drying out that started a year ago continued through winter with a much lower snowpack. Timber takes a long time to dry out and just as long to regain its moisture, meaning our forests will be more prone to wildfires this year. When timber burns, it creates the most smoke and air quality concerns, even though it's not what typically gives us the most acres burned in a year. That's grass, or fine fuels. An abundance of moisture in southern Idaho and eastern Oregon this year allowed those grasses and fine fuels the ability to thrive. While that might sound like a good thing initially, those fuels typically dry out quickly in the heat of summer and ignite easily and burn quickly. Here in the Northwest, our fire danger worsens throughout the heat of summer. This year, we not only have the fine fuels like grasses and vegetation drying out, but the drier forests to contend with as well. Hot, dry, windy conditions or critical fire weather days are becoming more common as our climate changes. An entire fire season can boil down to just one day, something we saw back in 2020 in Malden, or just last year in the Oregon Road or Gray Fires. Now more than ever, it comes down to us. The El Nino pattern, responsible for warm, dry weather, also means fewer storms and less lightning, so almost all of the wildfires this year will be caused by people. For Environment Northwest, I'm meteorologist Jeremy Legoo.
You don't really need a fancy study to know the Northwest is dealing with more smoke these days. We've all felt it.
You can almost feel it as you breathe in, and it's got a little bit of a burn to it.
It doesn't feel any better indoors than it does outdoors right now.
At Overlake Medical Center in Bellevue, Washington, it's meant more calls for doctors and nurse practitioners seeing patients with asthma, COPD, and related illnesses, like Tyler Cook.
That's probably one of our busiest times now. I've noticed this the last couple of years, as you know, we do see a lot of patients in our clinic with chronic lung issues like asthma and COPD.
His patients should be seeing the benefits of cleaner air, thanks to the Environmental Protection Agency's regulations on emissions over the years. But a new study from the University of Iowa says wildfires have erased 2 decades worth of air quality gains in our region. This graphic shows, in red, areas with the worst black carbon pollution. Parts of Washington, Oregon, and Idaho are all on the list. It's an especially dangerous kind of pollution because these particles are so small they can travel deep into the lungs and may even enter the bloodstream.
We might not see it. We can't see these tiny little particles. We can certainly see when there's smoke in the air, but really the impact that air quality has on your lungs.
UW-Bothell air quality expert Dan Jaffe says the only real way to prevent smoke is to prevent fires.
It's a combination of factors of fuel buildup, of climate change, which dries out the fuels, and then people being in the forest.
But there are things you can do to prepare yourself for the season to come. Jaffe and Cook both recommend air purifiers or a homemade device with a box fan and filter. It's best to put one in each room and prepare before smoke season starts.
The air that we breathe, it's paramount to us surviving.
For Environment Northwest, I'm Erica Zucco.
I'm standing in the burn scar of a 2022 fire near Ellensburg, dubbed the Vantage Highway Fire. Clues discovered right here are what helped investigators figure out what happened here and shed light on a big picture issue in the Northwest. Christine McCroskey proudly shows off her property.
Figured we'd come around this way for a different view.
In sync with her shadow is her pack of rescue dogs.
They're usually off hunting mice. They think they're cats, I guess. I don't know.
Critters are her closest neighbors here, just outside of Ellensburg.
Because I could walk over the hills, run across jackrabbits. The miniature dwarf rabbits live out here.
Her little slice of peaceful heaven quickly became hell on an August day in 2022.
It was one of the worst days of my life by the end of it.
Ultimately, more than 30,000 acres burned. It was dubbed the Vantage Highway Fire.
Huge fire advantage right now.
Department of Natural Resources Wildfire Communications Manager Ryan Rodrock was there the day the fire started.
And so it's just a matter of footwork going up and down along the ground until X marks the spot.
He describes the process of investigating the cause, which starts immediately.
Once they identify that general origin area, they will flag that off and treat it like an active investigation scene.
In this case, they quickly got to the bottom of it. A line in the brush pointed to the clues.
The general origin area is pretty obvious. You can see the delineation where the sagebrush essentially turns off. And then it was just a matter of determining what that specific ignition source was. And that got down to just good old-fashioned investigative footwork of our investigators walking back and forth through the black until they were able to find that specific spot where there was a lit cigar on the ground.
A story confirmed by Christine, whose vantage point for the Vantage Highway Fire answered the burning question.
I was up on an excavator and I was looking out towards the road. And I saw a car going really fast, which caught my attention. And then I saw an explosion of flame.
And this isn't unique. Washington's Lands Commissioner Hillary Franz says so far this year, there's already a 40% increase in fires compared to this time last year, a majority caused by people.
Lit material coming out of vehicles, that is the kind of negligent start that we see most often.
Across the Northwest, in states like Washington, Idaho, and Oregon, a vast majority of wildfires are caused by humans, anywhere from 80 to 90%. And of those human-caused wildfires, the top culprit is from debris burns that get out of hand, plus campfires getting out of hand is a huge issue. In addition to that, vehicles that drag chains or throw cigarettes out the window are a massive problem, plus mechanical issues, people doing work in fields like mowing or working with a chainsaw. These impacts still visible today.
This is 2 years worth of recovery. We should be seeing, chest-high sagebrush.
Record hot summers recently only fueling the fire.
Changes in the environment are playing a role in seeing more fire starts and occasionally larger fires.
In 2023, for the first time ever, more fires started on the west side of the Cascades versus the east side, likely because of drought conditions and a lack of wildfire awareness from people.
A little bit of prevention goes a long way.
In the case of the Vantage Highway Fire, they never found the driver responsible. But if they had, they would have held them financially accountable.
Took about 11 days to get it fully contained. Over 150 fire staff. At the end of the day, the fire burned over 30,000 acres and ended up costing the taxpayers of Washington over $7.5 million.
It's more than just numbers for Christine. It turned her heaven into hell.
But these fires go up so fast, you can't stop them. It's in an instant when that happens.
So they plead.
We all have, I think, a responsibility to make sure that we aren't that spark.
Asking for people to help protect this peace.
This fire didn't have to happen.
For Environment Northwest, I'm meteorologist Leah Pizzetti.
The aftermath of a wildfire,
when you first get there, it's a pretty shocking, sight.
Can be striking in its destruction.
It effectively devastated everything from the soil up, the seed banks up for a large continuous area.
That's Matthew Agai, Chief Science Officer for a company called Mast Reforestation. And he sees hope among the blackened trees and ashen landscapes.
We're looking at these hellscapes with a degree of optimism.
The company is taking a new approach to restoring burned forests.
Our goal is to use a pathway to reforestation, basically, to mitigate the worst effects of climate change.
It's a lofty goal, but the company is already showing early signs of success. In 2020, the Labor Day fires that swept across Oregon scorched nearly 175,000 acres in the Willamette National Forest. Among the burned areas was the Henry Creek watershed, east of Molalla. One of the biggest hurdles to reforestation is the cost, and that's where MAST approaches the problem a little differently. Trees are capable of storing large amounts of carbon dioxide, one of the primary drivers of climate change. And MAST sells carbon credits to people and companies looking to offset their emissions, essentially canceling out the carbon emitted from smokestacks with the carbon stored in trees. That allows the company to offer restoration to landowners at steep discounts.
The Henry Creek project is kind of the perfect case study for the type of work that MAST does.
But of course, you can't replant a forest without trees. And that's where a 150-year-old company called Silvaseed comes in.
Silvaseed is one of the largest private seed extractories and facilities in the western United States.
Kia Woodruff is the general manager.
The only way to get seed for regrowing forests is to go out in the forest and collect that seed. The cones start in one position here at the front.
They first come in as cones, which are sent through a kiln to open the scales and release the seeds. Then they go through a series of machines that brush and shake the seeds to sort and clean them.
We do this for a random sample of 100 seeds on every lot.
Once they're tested in a lab for viability, they're ready to plant.
The media is wrapped in a piece of biodegradable paper, and it just gives a little bit of extra protection to the roots, a little bit easier to handle.
This assembly line can produce up to 136,000 seedlings each day. And they all end up just down the road in Silvaseed's greenhouses. I asked Woodruff how many are in each greenhouse.
Maybe 1 million.
She said it's not easy work, but it does have its rewards.
Every single time there's a fire, it's like, okay, who are the people that are going to be affected by this fire, and what resources can we bring to bear on that?
More than 160,000 of those seedlings have made their way out to the 300 acres on the Henry Creek project. Some were dropped in seed pucks by heavy lift drones. Others were planted the old-fashioned way. And the trees that were planted resulted in offsetting more than 200,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide, according to MAST. That's the equivalent of canceling out the yearly emissions of more than 47,000 cars.
As soon as they're put in the ground, they're accumulating carbon and creating wood, and that's something we want to protect and create resilience for on a very long, decadal, century-long timeline.
There are some skeptics of using reforestation to offset carbon emissions, though. Grayson Badgley is a research scientist with a group called Carbon Plan.
So Carbon Plan is a nonprofit that we use the tools of open science and data to make sure that we're focusing on climate solutions that work.
And Badgley's skepticism lies in the very nature of offsets.
You burn some fossil fuel and you add that carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, but you trade that for the promise of a good thing happening somewhere else.
Carbon dioxide can persist in the atmosphere for hundreds of years or even longer. And trees are inherently temporal, sometimes dying naturally, other times wiped out en masse by things like wildfires. And if they die and release that carbon back into the atmosphere, then nothing has really been offset at all.
If there's an imbalance between the harm done to the atmosphere and the good done to the atmosphere, what we end up with is the atmosphere actually being in a worse place than if we had just sort of gone directly and regulated those emissions straightforward.
Still, a guy was confident in the company's plan over the long term.
If we think about the individual or stand, of course, there's going to be dynamism. Trees fall down. New trees are going to grow when we plant more trees. They're going to reproduce.
And he said that the more trees that can be planted, the more resilient they'll be to wildfire, and the more confidence buyers will have in carbon credits.
As soon as we do that at a very large scale, we start to see that the impact and the resilience are much better. The outlook is much better, and it should create confidence in these markets.
But a guy also knows it'll take more than just reforestation to fully combat the impacts of climate change in the West.
The future of the Western landscape is really dependent on this combination of tending to natural systems that have a natural resilience but also working as fast as we can to quickly recover these hellscapes or these moonscapes.
Cale Williams, KGW News.
In 2022, the Four Corners fire got incredibly close to cabins and homes in Cascade, Idaho. Thankfully, that fire was stopped at around 14,000 acres, but of course, it had an impact on the natural landscape. So we're here to examine how the landscape is recovering.
If you look across at the mountain, it's not burned black with just sticks all the way across.
Dana Harris is the district ranger.
As far as the severity on this fire,
for the New Meadows district of the Payette National Forest.
About 98% of it was moderate and low severity, and about 2% of it was high.
Harris says that's a good thing.
That tells us that this is a fire that's doing its natural thing on the landscape.
Prescribed burns were slated for this area before lightning ignited this fire in August of 2022.
There hadn't been one for a while. We have been excluding wildfire from the forest. We've been doing that for 100 years, just putting fires out as fast as we could. Fire is a natural process, and so this ecosystem is one that before European settlement there was fire. The scary part of wildfire is when it threatens infrastructure and human life.
Harris says because this fire was mostly low to moderate severity, it had some benefits for the forest.
It opened up spots for regeneration of different species of plants and trees, and it opened up the understory for wildlife as well.
We know now that this fire had benefits, but that's not something officials know right away. A specialized team is deployed to determine the severity of the fire and if there are still root systems to hold soil on the slopes.
We want to make sure that it'll be safe over the winter and when it rains.
University of Idaho professor Heather Heward was a field observer on the Four Corners fire. She specializes in fire ecology and management.
My job was to go around into the areas that were burning actively and observe what was burning so that I could communicate back to what's called the fire behavior analyst and say to them, hey, this fuel type is burning right now and this one's not.
At the site our crew visited, Professor Heward says she saw great signs of recovery. Here's what she noticed. Shrubs are resprouting, which means their roots weren't overheated. Non-native mullein and thistle are taking over the more disturbed sites, which probably means there was more heat there. The native yarrow and shrubs are coming in less disturbed spots. There are trees that still have green tops showing, which is a good indicator they will survive. They may also have more resources than they had before this fire since there is less competition from other trees. However, there are some trees that are dead and will likely be cut down. Professor Heward says it would probably take between 30 and 100 years for this area to return to what it was like before this fire. But for more intense fires in older forests, it can potentially take hundreds of years to get very old trees back.
That process is going to be helped by a lot of these patches of green that are going to drop their seed.
This area will continue to be monitored for years to come, and if trees don't grow back naturally, or if there's another damaging fire, the Forest Service may replant the trees manually. For Environment Northwest, I'm Sophia Bliss.
At first glance, this might seem like a normal bit of forest, but look up. You'll notice the red, dead tops of the trees. Those tell a different story. He's an expert hunter.
Just saves a lot of time of hatchet work.
Looking for a tiny critter having a catastrophic impact on our forests.
Okay.
Popcorn-looking holes show where the adults enter to lay their eggs. Small holes show where the larvae emerge. The red color of the top of the tree marking the impact of the bark beetles.
That means the tree died really quickly.
It's late in the season, but Washington State entomologist Glenn Kohler finds one example of this insect still hiding in the tree.
So this is an adult bark beetle. So you can see how small they are.
Of bark beetles, he says only about a dozen types are considered pests. In the Northwest, the different types of beetles prey on different types of trees. Some beetles attack trees that are already dead, some that are on the verge of death because of drought, and some that are packed too close together, threatening each other.
There's definitely a correlation between risk of bark beetle outbreak damage and stand density. And it's always going to be a higher risk when you have a more dense stand and more competition.
Kohler says the State Department of Natural Resources flies over millions of acres of land every year counting the dead trees. And they're seeing an increase in dead trees in the last decade.
But the problem is we've been having those kind of regularly and longer periods. And so you get this cumulative effect, and whatever defense resources the tree has are really compromised. And so the beetle numbers are going up as a result of the drought stress issue.
And once the trees die, comes another issue. They fall and blanket the ground.
One of the kind of side effects in some areas of this can be increased risk of wildfire in stands like this, where you have very high density amounts of dead trees. It can be a lot of fuel buildup.
There are solutions, though.
It's the fun part of my job. I get to walk with landowners. We talk about all the goals that they have for their property.
A mission boosted by Washington State House Bill 1168 in 2021, which gives $125 million every 2 years to increase wildland fire response. That money supports DNR's Katie Zander, who visits with private landowners to make sure they're spacing out trees to keep beetles away and keeping them trim in the right places.
During this time, we will walk their forest stand and we'll take a look at their forest structure. That's the most important thing.
It seems like, yeah, we want to keep green up high, but it's the down low on the ground. That's where we want to really control.
That's exactly right. These ladder fuels, whether it's a low-hanging branch that's getting down to the ground, a short tree that's meeting up with some low-hanging branches, or some brush growing into the canopies of the trees, that's what we're looking to reduce out on these properties.
Steps that need to be taken on both public and private land, because these beetles don't know borders.
As long as there's susceptible hosts out there, or the drought conditions continue, and other factors that are keeping their populations high continue, then we're just going to see more and more acres with bark beetle mortality.
In the meantime, they're keeping an eye on these forests, monitoring the major impacts from these small insects. More than 1 year after the Bolt Creek fire burned and shut down a part of Highway 2, a new natural disaster now looms, and researchers are trying to figure out exactly when this might hit. It's a problem that stems after a fire, when heavy rain hits the burn scar.
During even a modest rainstorm, all that water that used to be soaked into the ground now slides and runs off, so kind of like it's on a slip and slide.
But the problem Washington Department of Natural Resources Kate Mickelson and her team are asking right now is, when are debris flows most likely to happen after a fire? When it rains, scientists look at the slope of the land and how severe a fire burned to give the debris flow risk a rating. But there's one key problem here.
That modeling was developed and tested for Southern California, which is very different than our climate, vegetation, and geology up here in the Pacific Northwest.
So they're now trying to redefine that metric. Their analysis showing that within the Northwest, specific regions differ from each other, like the different sides of the Cascades.
We're not seeing events in those fires until 4 to 5 years after the fire. Whereas on the eastern side, we see those, during the fire or in the first couple of years after the fire. These west side fires may not be at their highest risk until years 4, 5, 6, 7.
And now they're collecting data to figure out the timeline.
We're trying to right now answer two fundamental questions. How much rainfall does it take to trigger debris flows in these burn scars, and how long are these areas at risk following the fire?
They're using two tools that are key in finding answers. The first, weather stations. This one in the Bolt Creek burn scar is one of 3 installed about a year ago. Previously, rainfall data had to be manually collected. Now they can see exactly how much rain falls and when.
So we really need not only the rainfall, but we need to correlate the time of the event to get that exact rainfall.
The second is up in the mountains. Kate and her team hike into the burn scar following this stream, which is a likely place for a debris flow to occur, then find the perfect place to mount a camera. So now, if this area were to have a debris flow, this camera would document exactly when it happened.
That's a huge puzzle piece. Normally we know the day, and then if it occurred in the morning or the afternoon, and then we kind of have to guess based on the rainfall data when we think it occurred. These eliminate that guessing completely.
Since 2021, DNR has cataloged 119 debris flows on 9 different burn scars in the state. One in eastern Washington on the Cedar Creek burn scar. Their newly installed cameras there capturing the chaos.
We have photos from before and after the event. and just seeing the wall of water and material go so quickly is really impressive.
In Western Washington, there's a need to fine-tune these metrics because the Bolt Creek's burn scar is above towns like Grotto, Bering, and Skykomish, and also Highway 2. Bering resident Eric Skavarch remembers staying behind to protect his home from the fire and the problems after the highway shut down.
People had to drive all the way to I-90 and around 4 or 5 hours with their kids at school here and stuck up in Sky.
So WashDOT is working to prevent another highway closure.
Debris flows are channelized, so they usually will follow an existing channel. So this is how we predicted that it's possible that it could come down here.
Transportation engineer Caitlin Card shows where WashDOT is installing fencing along the highway, spots they say are at the highest risk for road impacts if a debris flow should happen.
So that'll be able to catch any large debris that comes down in a debris flow and allow just this water to pass. If larger debris were to come down, it could clog up the culvert and then become it to be overwhelmed, and then we'd have water on the highway.
This is preventative, while DNR continues to monitor nearby burn scars using these new tools to collect data now that will help them in the future.
I'm excited to see what the next decade brings and how many answers that we're able to solve.
In forecasting, meteorologists use metrics to help make complex issues easy to understand. If I say Category 5 hurricane, you know that's severe. There's also a scale used to measure fire risk. It's called the Haynes Index and is based on dryness and storm potential. It's commonly used in the West, especially the Pacific Northwest, where dry summers with the potential for thunderstorms and lightning are common. Like other scales, a formula is used to calculate the output. It measures two things: moisture content, or relative humidity, and stability, which is basically how mild or storm-prone the air is. Each of these factors are given a ranking 1 through 3. For relative humidity, a 1 ranking means very moist air, and a 3 ranking means very dry air. For stability, a 1 ranking means stable air, so a mild weather day, and a 3 means unstable air, which can bring thunderstorms and the threat of lightning. Those two numbers are added together to create a final ranking somewhere between 2 and 6. National Weather Service forecaster Steve Reedy says when the output is higher, so a 5 or 6, that means we have dry air with high thunderstorm potential, increasing the risk for fire.
Having the general public kind of aware of this metric can certainly be used as a fantastic tool to get, to heighten people's awareness, to consider, okay, maybe I should be a little more fire wise today, maybe not start that campfire.
It's a balance between people and the elements, though. Looking at 2022 statistics in the Northwest, people started about 2,300 fires last year. Lightning started about 1,200 fires. But more acres burned because of lightning. Close to 162,000 acres burned in human-caused fires, while about 562,000 acres burned in lightning-caused fires, showing just how severe lightning-caused fires can be. While it may not be very well known, this is why the Haynes Index matters. Scientists say it's important to know when there are dry days that also have the potential for lightning.
And its formation is complicated, but part of the reason why it is the way that it is so that it can break down this complicated information in a really digestible way.
Another important factor in fire risk is winds. Winds are not factored into the Haynes Index, but can definitely play a negative role on a fire-prone day. With editor Kevin Glantz, I'm meteorologist Leah Pizzetti.